Welcome to the 2023 CHURD webinar series. I'm Kathleen Mattheos from the Center for Higher Education Research and Development, and I join you from University of Manitoba, located on the original land of the Anishinaabe Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. I welcome you from the various treaty and unceded lands on which we all have the privilege to live and work. Today, I'm really pleased because we're joined by Dru Marshall, a former provost at the University of Calgary and a current SUAC lead instructor. I see there's some familiar SUAC faces here. Dru brings a range of experience to this webinar, and I want to draw particular attention to her high-performance sport coaching experience, which she says informed her leadership and certainly contributed to her strong reputation as a team builder, leader, and mentor. Today, Dru's going to speak on networking as a leadership skill. It's sometimes overlooked. In fact, it wasn't part of our curriculum until Dru brought it to our attention, and we've incorporated it, recognizing its importance. It's a key component of leadership, and we'll certainly learn that over the next hour. Thank you again, Dru, for taking your time to join us, and thank you to all of you for taking time to join us today.
Well, thanks, Kathleen, and great to have everybody. Happy New Year for those of you that I have not had a chance to connect with yet. I'm really pleased to be here for the first CHURD webinar of 2023. And as Kathleen has rightly pointed out, today's session is on networking, which is often a forgotten leadership skill. And I think it's a really important skill when you're thinking about your own leadership toolbox and the things that might be in there. If you have questions throughout the presentation today, we're going to try to do those through chat. So some of you will have been on earlier. You can see that we have opened up the chat function, I think. And if not, you can raise your hand and I can apparently disable and allow you to talk. This is, so we're going to trial and error, I think, a few things as we go through here, but there'll also be lots of time for questions, I hope, at the end of the presentation today, if you should have any. All right, so in terms of the session today, there are a couple of outcomes we'd like to have at the end. One is, I'm hoping that you have a much better understanding of why network is important and that you understand the central value of networks to your development as an academic leader. And secondly, I hope that this is the homework piece actually of the session today, that you will be able to take the time and understand how you might build your own personalized plan to develop your own leadership network or to expand it if you already have one. And in order to do that, you're going to have to think about your own leadership profile and think about what and who you actually need in that leadership network. So more on that towards the end of the presentation. So let's start by talking about what networking actually is, because it's often not taught in leadership development courses, I think because it's associated often with a negative connotation. You know, that idea that it's schmoozing or sleazy, sometimes even associated with nepotism. But on a more positive side, it's about support, getting encouragement for what you're doing, developing positive relationships. And I don't know about you, but I think who could not use that as a leader today? So it's often associated with the old boys network. That's that informal connections through which men often use their positions to help other men. But network really is about the art of building relationships. And when those relationships exist and are built, they form what we call a network. And of course, the process of building those relationships is called networking. Now, I'm going to say you probably belong to many networks. You'll have your personal networks that have your family and friends. You may have a different social network outside of that personal network, and there might be some overlapping people between those two. You likely have a professional network, maybe even a disciplinary network where you can go for advice about your career. and for support. I know you get the idea here about the multiple types of networks that you can have. I'll give you another one. I recently moved to Vancouver and I got a dog when I got here. And one of my most important networks is the network of dog owners in the West End of Vancouver. We share stories and locations of coyote and raccoon sightings, as well as when the city staffers come to the park. And so those are the people who levy heavy fines when your dog is off leash. So that network has been really important to me in socializing to Vancouver, because it's kept me safe and my dog safe, and it saved me a lot of money. Leadership networking, the thing we're talking about today, and particular leadership developing networking, is about developing and using your networks that build relationships and strengthens alliance in service of your work and goals. So in essence, in order to build your leadership network, you need to understand two things: your own personal leadership profile. What are your strengths? What are your challenges? And what key goals you want to accomplish? So leadership is not just defined by how many hours you spend at work, but by your ability to connect with others, your ability to incorporate multiple perspectives, and your ability to navigate various groups. Networking takes time, but it really matters, and it's about building your personal and professional capital. So I really encourage you to think about it. Now, I'm on the latter end of my career, and so I've had an opportunity to really reflect and observe about many experiences that I've had. And I have lots of what I call leadership universal truths, but I'll share 3 of them today that I think are important for this session. People work with people who they know and trust. So relationship building is a really key skill. University leadership and administration is a team sport. You rarely, if anything, if ever, accomplish anything on your own. I can think of all the accomplishments that I've had. I can't think of one that I would tie just to me. It really is a team sport in terms of people that contribute to the accomplishment. So think deeply about that. And then leadership skills are best developed when there's deliberate intentional action to do so. And I'm going to talk about that today in terms of some of the things that you might think about in your networking opportunities. So this slide contains a bunch of skills or competencies. The list comes from the leadership literature. There's content knowledge, both content knowledge, which sometimes it's called the what, or the science of leadership. And then there is procedural knowledge, sometimes referred to as the how, or the art of leadership. I won't go through the list in details, but I do want to call out a couple of them and draw your attention, for example, to content expertise. When I was hired as national field hockey coach, there's no question I got hired because of my tactical and technical expertise related to field hockey. At a university, when we hire leaders, it's not typically about your content expertise as a leader. It's your disciplinary expertise that gives you credibility or cachet in a leadership environment and in the university environment. And so it means we often appoint leaders with very little training and sometimes experience. So I always give the example, I was an obesity researcher. I don't know what about that screams that I would be a good university provost. And you can apply that across the board. Now, universities, I think, that are really advancing have really spent a lot of time on leadership development for those people who are in leadership positions. I think the best ones are also identifying emerging leaders or those that they think have promise to develop as individuals. And they're really being intentional and deliberate in ensuring that those people become more skilled as leaders. And I think there are many universities that also provide personal coaching for leaders, so that there's almost bespoke programs of leadership development that are happening at universities now. I think what's important about this list is to remember is that skills can be learned, they can then be practiced and developed, and you can become masters at all of them, even if you don't start with them. And so I'm going to say, as I always do to people who are in leadership development programs or webinars such as this one, kudos to you for taking the time today. It tells me that you think leadership development is important. And I think these are always important opportunities for you to reflect on your own personal leadership journey. Now, leadership programs typically, as I said, focus on these skills, but the one that they frequently leave out is networking. And so I'm really pleased that both SUAC and CHURD have agreed that networking is important and has started to include it in more pieces. I'm also going to give a personal reflection on leadership programs more generally. I've had an opportunity to go to lots of leadership development programs, whether through my coaching development, through university leadership, or as a women's leader. There are many courses for women's leadership. I've always taken away something from every course, but the real value is with the people that I connected with. And you know, they've provided support, encouragement, advice when I've needed it. And I try to do the same for people that are in my network. And actually, I remain connected to many people that I've met in leadership programs that I've been at. I understood intuitively why networking was important, why that connection to people was important in my own leadership development network. And it's why I use that as a key principle in the Academic Leadership Academy that we put together when I was provost at the University of Calgary. And I've encouraged other provosts to do the same thing. So leadership networks can be used for a variety of things. The people in your network are used in a variety of ways. Prior to a new job, all of the thought process that goes into applying for the new job, whether you should apply or not, if you do apply, in preparation for an interview, this is the flexible and personalized support and career advice and advancement that a network can provide. And once you're in a job, your network can help you understand the position and what it means to be a leader. It can help you engage in critical self-reflection. So your network should not just be filled with people who love you and support you no matter what, although that is really important. You also want people in your network to ask critical questions, not just tell you, you know, what you want to think, not just tell you what to do, but to really encourage you to think deeply about the issues and increase your own self-awareness. Of course, self-awareness is a foundational skill for any leader to have, and you want people to force you to think about issues differently. And then those same people can help you think about developing new leadership skills. They might be expert in a particular skill, or they can connect you to other people who are those experts to help you. I had the real privilege to work with my last PhD student at the University of Calgary, Leda Stanechko, who was very interested in leadership development, particularly at the chair level. And the key finding in her study was the importance of leadership networks in the development of leaders, which of course was really interesting to me. This was the model that came out of her dissertation. And essentially, she said that research and teaching faculty, those people who apply or who are selected, tapped on the shoulder, if you will, to be chairs, go through a transformational process to become a department chair. And at the heart of that transformation sits leadership networks. And those people in their networks help in increasing a conceptual understanding of the actual position. They help in forcing self-reflection and in the skill development that's required. And in fact, I think a really interesting finding in Leda's work was that she found networks are more valuable than the courses or programs that the people in her study took. So I'm going to say that again. The individual leadership networks that each study participant had were deemed to be more important than any course or program that they took. This is why a seminal reason for why leadership networks are important. I want to talk a little bit about, everybody's talking about EDI right now, diversity and inclusion, why it's so important. And it turns out that it's important in networking to have that conversation. So to begin with, I want to say Ryerson, Winston, and Dahlberg had this, have written a lot on mentoring, and mentoring particularly in STEM fields. This is a quote from one of their 2019 articles that talent is equally distributed amongst all sociocultural groups, but access and opportunity are not. And that access and opportunity includes access and opportunity to programs. But it turns out that programs actually may not meet the needs of those that are in equity-seeking groups. And so I want you to think about this maybe in a different way. So they go on to say, and this is just, I think, for information for you in this particular webinar, but I don't think it should be surprising for you to know that it's particularly true for those in the STEM fields, that underrepresentation of marginalized groups in STEM context is pervasive. We can talk about other contexts too. I am going to talk about equity-seeking groups in networking, but I want to talk first about men and women, where there's significant literature and research that's been done on this topics. I'll talk about equity-seeking groups more generally in a second, where there's less research, but some important findings that have occurred to date. So let's talk about men first. I think men are trained to network from a young age, and they understand that mixing business and friendship is actually how you get ahead. And so when men network, they usually form alliances, and their networks tend to be broader, larger, with multiple hubs. Multiple hubs are people that have other networks. And so they get attached to a tremendous amount of information very, very quickly. And they're much more strategic and purposeful. If men are networking, there's little small talk. They get right to the point. They typically have a very clear goal in mind, and they're much more comfortable in asking for what they want. And they're really good at connecting with other men. In many cases in the literature, it's suggested that's why we have many more male CEOs than women. Women, on the other hand, focus more on building long-term connections. They tend not to ask for what they want. They tend to think first about how they can help the other person. So they distinguish between personal and professional networks. They should distinguish more. So their networks are less powerful because they're not as broad. They're more social, and they're smaller, but they have deeper networks based on trust. They don't necessarily use the networks they have for professional advancement, which is a problem. I think women should be more intentional on that. And the lack of networks are cited as one potential reason for the gender gap that we see in leadership positions in work situations. Women, I think, need to be more direct and more strategic. Uzi, who wrote in the Harvard Business Review in 2019, Women also have multiple hubs, but they have to have an inner circle. So this idea of dual networks, if they want to advance to the higher level of authority. And so the idea of dual networks, first, they have a more general network, just as the men would have, but they have to have an inner circle of close female contacts. Uzi suggests that could be 1 to 3. And the reason for that is those close female contacts share private information about cultural and political hurdles that they've had to overcome in an organization, which men typically don't have to do. So I want you to think about that inner circle of having some people that have been there before that can tell them how they overcame the hurdles to get into the leadership positions they were. You know, this idea about lacking confidence and stuff, women just have to get over, I think, and think differently about these kinds of things. So there are barriers to networking for women that we can talk about. Often women don't attend events after work where a lot of the networking occurs because of other responsibilities, either child or elder care. There's a tendency to avoid networking with men in social settings, so any behavior that occurs there can't be misconstrued. This is particularly relevant now when sexual harassment is front and center, and we've seen so much in the news about this topic that women are avoiding social settings in some cases, just to not have any discussion or any backroom chatter about them. There's a lack of a close circle, inner circle of women who have made it. And that lack, you know, we know that women who can form a strong circle with other women who can share advice are nearly 3 times more likely to get a better job than women that don't have that support system. So think about that for a second. If you're a female academic and you've never seen a women president on your campus, or you've never seen a female dean in your faculty, which I'm sorry to say is still relevant in Canadian universities today, it's difficult for you to imagine the possibility that you have. And it's also difficult for you to include people in your network because they don't exist. So you have to think about going outward or getting males who are female friendly, who are feminists, who can help do the kind of thing that you want to do. Often there's a lack of confidence regarding a network contribution because there's a duality there. It's not only what you take from the network, it's also what you can provide. And women are often constrained by self-doubt and limited faith in what they can bring to the table. And, you know, I think the bottom line in that regard is that women have to get over themselves. They have to stop underestimating their own power and really understand the contributions that they can make. And often women are uncomfortable with the exploitive nature of networking, particularly if they're thinking they're going to be intentional about career advancement. Again, I say, this is what you need to do. I think if you're really going to take control of your career rather than being a twig in the river and letting it take you wherever you might want to go. So let me talk about barriers to skill training for employment, for equity seeking groups more generally. And this comes from the SRDC report that was written in May 2021. If you're interested in EDI and you haven't taken a look at that report, I'd really, really encourage you to do so. Essentially, a couple of general comments. Barriers affect different aspects of people's engagement with the labor market and with their own career development. We've just gone through barriers for women, right? But those barriers apply whether you're accessing training opportunities or employment support, whether you're seeking employment, or whether you're maintaining or advancing employment. So again, barriers can apply to accessing training and employment support, for seeking employment, for maintaining or retaining your job, or for advancing. So that's a really important point. So when we're talking about equity-seeking groups, they tend to be amongst the least well-served by training and employment programs. Anyone can face the barrier to skill development and employment success, but employment equity-seeking groups face multiple and intersecting and systemic barriers, regardless of the skill level that they have. So from a training perspective, and here we're talking about skills training because we're talking about networking, and networking is a skill. Some barriers might include a lack of inclusive workplace. So what does that look like? Well, due to cultural awareness or lack of awareness and limited capacity of employers to work appropriately with employees with different identities and from different backgrounds. And they might not understand even language sometimes that they use is something that limits or places a barrier on someone from a different cultural background. So inclusion and inclusive workplaces are important. Unconscious bias. So those are the deep-seated stereotypes and prejudices we all absorb due to living in a deeply unequal and inequitable society. So examples of unconscious bias, that a nurse has to be a woman, that a Black man will always be aggressive, that an Asian woman wouldn't make a great leader. These are examples of unconscious bias, and they contrast with explicit bias, which leads someone to deliberately and willfully discriminate against another. So that's the next one, whether you have stigma, discrimination, prejudice, negative perceptions and attitudes. You know, I was shocked. I shouldn't have been when we were putting our Indigenous strategy together at University of Calgary. We did a number of things to get information and collect data from our community. We had kindling conversations. We met with the Indigenous community. We met with the community at large. We met with a group of elders. And then we had a questionnaire that we sent to all of our Indigenous scholars and students on our campus. And the results of that questionnaire were amongst the most difficult that I had to read when I was provost, because of the outright stories of discrimination and prejudice that existed on our campus that I had no idea about. And our strategy was about correcting that and meeting it head on. So this is a problem. I'm sure you're aware of harassment and microaggression by peers. And you should know that leaders in particular face microaggression from peers all the time. This is something that you get as a leader that you didn't know you were going to get when you took the job, but there you have it. And of course, lack of representation. And when we talk about equity-seeking groups, lack of representation is really important. So they're unable to see themselves reflected and protected within their own group, or to draw upon role models or mentors, and in some cases, resources. So those are only some of the barriers, but as a result of the barriers and the intersectionality of those barriers, we see ongoing limitations in social capital and opportunities. And the result is that those groups often select into occupations, programs, workplaces that are perceived to be safe and inclusive, but which inadvertently reinforces the inequities. So when we talk then about barriers to networking for equity-seeking groups, and of course, women are one of those equity-seeking groups, but we also talk about Indigenous, persons with disabilities, racialized individuals, and persons that identify as LGBTQ TS plus. You know, when you have limited social capital, which we've just talked about, and social capital is not well developed because they have less access to experience and resources that foster social capital. That could include things like coaching from mentors and role models. If you have limited social capital, it means you have limited professional networks. due to historical and ongoing underrepresentation in and access to specific fields. In other words, you're not able to draw on as many people as you might have. That's problematic. There are also informational barriers as a result of that. And information is power. And if you don't have information, you have little exchange opportunities. Now, I think one of the advantages, if you could call it this for an equity-seeking group, is they have the cultural expertise and the know-how of what it means to be in an equity-seeking group. That is power in and of itself when you're talking about networking, given the emphasis in EDI today. But I'm sure equity-seeking groups don't see that as something they have in their back pocket. And then there are continued challenges in finding sponsors and mentors, individuals who normally you would connect, who would connect you to others, and who would serve as hubs, for example, in your network. So it means that we might have to have individualized approaches. I talked about at the beginning in leadership development programs that they're often bespoke part of programs at universities today, coaching and individualized coaching. I think this becomes really important when you're dealing with someone from an equity-seeking group. And it's really important if you really want to think about maximizing the potential of people, you have to think about how you'd maximize potential of people in an equity-seeking group. Now, I am going to make some general comments, more general comments, I think, to talk about leadership networking, that it really is developing and using your networks that builds relationships and strengthens alliances in service of your work and goals. So again, a reminder that you have to understand what your goals are. Staying on good terms is really important. So that relationship building aspect of networking is critical. It means that there's a give and take. You can't just go into a network and think that you're just going to take from people. You have to be willing to give back. So I say it's important to give as much as you take. Be generous with your time. So I am so appreciative of the people in my networks that have helped me over the years. If people ask me for help, if there's any possible way I can do it, I make sure that I do. That giving back component is really, really important. It's important for you to know what you're good at. So make sure that you establish really good skills and that you can offer to help others in your field of expertise and as a leader once you've developed those skills. Everybody has value, so remember to try and find the gift that everybody brings. I think when you're meeting new people that you want in your network, do your homework on those people. Know what they're about and what they can contribute so you're not wasting time, and follow through on any opportunities that you or offers that you've made to help. I think if you know that individual in your group will not have the same access to information, to people, or to opportunities, if you're an N of one, or if your group represents less than 15 to 30%, which is often quoted in the literature as a critical mass that you need to sort of make a difference. So that's like 2 to 3 out of 10. If you're not in a group that's 2 to 3 out of 10, find allies and leaders who can help you. Go outside your field for advice, right? Make sure that you're not trying to do it all on your own, because you'll encounter systemic barriers that are going to prevent you from going there. A couple of things to consider in building your network: seek quantity over quality. Seek quality over quantity. It's not how many people you know, but who you know. So connect to the people who are connected to others. Connect to those people who are hubs, if you will, that can help you connect to others. Embrace diversity in strategically selecting your network. So look for people outside your field who are great leaders, outside your unit, outside your faculty. I always say leadership is leadership. And people who are leaders in other fields can still give you great advice. And, there are hundreds of ways to do things and more than one right way. So be open-minded to where ideas might come from. Also say beware of a closed inner circle. That's if your circle, and this is particularly for women and probably for people in equity-seeking groups, if your group is too interconnected, so the people are similar, they have similar contacts and backgrounds, it will feel really socially secure and it will fulfill a really important need for you, but it will fail to generate new insights and opportunities. And that's why when we talk about leadership development networks, you should be broadening the people in your circle. That close inner circle is important, but also have a group of external hubs. And importantly, I think, find allies to help. If you're uncomfortable with this, find allies to help you. Some practical advice, and some of this is not culturally specific. And so we want to talk maybe about this at the end, thinking about how we can culturally make some of these specific. But there are a few of these, I think, that are important regardless of what group you're in. So events are great opportunities for networking. And I know that quite often there's scheduled socializing for these events, either before or after. And if you're really busy as a leader, you can think, oh, okay, that event starts at 6, the networking opportunities are at 5:30. I'm not going to go until 5 to 6. You have missed a prime opportunity to get to know and meet different people that might become part of your networking. So I'd encourage you to go and take advantage of those opportunities. Might be more important than sitting in your office doing what you think is important. Ask your mutual acquaintances and your allies to make introductions. They're the ones that can help you expand your network. Communicate with many, but connect with only a few. So I think it's important to go broadly and meet people. But when we talk about connecting with a few, think about why you would connect with those. Is it work related? Are there things that that person knows that could be very valuable for you in your position? Do you know a colleague who might benefit from knowing that person? So again, you're thinking about networking as the giving back. Are there ways that you can help others? And so it's a good contact for you to have. You think you can help them in some way. They might know what you have to offer. And so you can meet them and talk about some of the things that you have that may be helpful. You may just be intrigued. You've heard about the individual, you want to know more about them, and this is an opportunity to meet them and get to know them. So get out of your office. It's a great way to meet different people, right? Don't stay in your office all the time. Go to meet people where they are. As you're walking there, you'd be surprised how many people you run into on your campus. When you're going to conferences or meetings, think about in advance who you might want to meet, whether they're the leaders in your field, if it's a leadership conference, someone who's done something that you think, wow, I'd really like to understand what they went through when they were in that situation. And once that meeting occurs, if you can, follow up. Think about questions to ask, maintain the connections so they become part of your network. When you're doing that, do your homework again on the people, understand who they are. And the other thing I would say, think about opportunities to connect with people who might be able to help you. So what are some of those? I would say, for example, church, sporting events, community events, cultural events, where you know other leaders are going to be that you wanted to meet, and take the opportunity to try and get to know them. Okay, so here's your homework, and this is that second outcome that we were thinking about. So in terms of building your leadership development network, there are a couple of things I want you to think about. What are the gaps in your leadership profile? So that means if I put my leadership profile, all those skills I showed on the other slide, what am I really good at? And where do I have challenges? Where do I really think about needing purposeful intervention to develop the skills or competencies that I have that I currently don't have as a leader that I need to get better at. You know, quite often we go to courses to talk about the things we're already good at, when we really should be going to courses for things we're not really good at. So think about that. And that requires some deep reflection. Those people, and then I try to identify people you know who could help you address those gaps or shortfalls or challenges that you have. And it might be people in your unit, but it doesn't have to be. It could be people that are at the university in other units or faculties. And in fact, they don't have to be at the university. So if you are in an equity seeking group, for example, and you know of a leader outside the university who might be able to help you, that would be really positive. The one check and balance that you have to have is making sure that you have an ally that can help you understand the cultural norms of your university, your department, your unit, your faculty, that type of thing. If you're shy, if you don't think you know them well enough, or you don't know them at all, do you need some help in contacting them? If you do, who do you know that can help you? Who can you identify in your community that might be someone that connect you with those people? That's your homework. My last comment is just going to be to remind you that networking is a skill. It is an important leadership skill, and that skills can be practiced and improved. And so be really intentional and deliberate with the actions that you take to improve it. And that should leave us with 15 minutes for questions. So Kathleen, I'm not quite sure how you want to do this, through the chat function or through the Q&A function associated with the webinar.
Why don't we use the Q&A because it's working now?
Okay.
And if people want to pop their questions in, I see we have one from earlier to show that it was working, but please go ahead. And can you see the Q&A function too, Drew?
I can.
Good. Okay.
I can see, but either people are busy typing right now, or there are no questions. So this is where we have a pregnant pause.
I have a question. May I ask it?
Yes.
I really want to know how building a network, but I mean, one of the issues we've all faced is sustaining our network over the last 2.5 years. And as now we're rebuilding, we're still not really together in the same way. What do you think one can do to be sure that we haven't lost those valuable connections from 2019 that paused?
Kathleen, it's a great question. And I would hope that many of you have maintained networks through phone calls or Zoom calls or team-based calls while you've been there. I know I had a really weird thing because I moved to Vancouver while I was on my leave, and it was awful driving out of Calgary, not being able to say goodbye in person. So I've had a chance to go back and connect with some people. I regularly try to email Kathleen to make sure that I'm still connected, especially when you're not in the same city. But we don't have people returning at the same rate either. And so some of it is coaxing people to come out and play again. Some of it is making sure that you're talking on the phone and just reaching out and connecting. I think it's really, really important. So I know we've got a couple of questions that come in, and maybe I'll read them and then respond. So the first is, how do you handle the non-positive side of networking, or what are some of the non-positive sides of networking, and how do you deal with those issues? So, you know, the non-positive side, and I think, you always have a cost benefit ratio for anything you do. Let me just start by saying the positives outweigh the negatives, I think, in networking. So that context of you feel sleazy because you're asking for help, ask for help, get over yourself, right? These are, that's the way we get better, is to make sure that we ask for something that we need. And the worst thing that can happen is people say no. But if you never venture with a question, you will never find, you'll never find the answers that you're looking for. So I'd really, really encourage you, if people think you're sleazy or not authentic, and this is why I say relationship building is at the core of networking. And when we talk about relationship building, it does need to be authentic. It can't be that inauthentic sleaziness. I'm just going to go in a room and connect with everybody. So that's the way I would say: be authentic, be yourself, and be okay with asking for what you need. We have another attendee who is saying they're part of an equity-seeking group and finds it difficult to network because they're not very comfortable and not used to speaking with different kinds of people. What tips can you give people like us in order to build confidence and try to network more in the future? I really appreciate that question because I'm female. I came up in a faculty where I was less than 30%. And so really had to think about how connecting, and I am an introvert to the extreme. And so it's hard for me to talk to people that I don't know. Even today, it's hard for me to talk to people that I don't know. But what I can say is these are skills that can be practiced and developed. And that's the critical part of this. And you start by taking a step, right? So you might be uncomfortable talking to people you don't know. The only way you get more comfortable doing that is by doing it. And so you have to take that first step. And I would say, if it makes you more comfortable, have someone with you that you're really comfortable with that can help ease that transition. And that's the way I'd start. I'd say start with little steps. And get some allies that can help you. Another question here, it's around the give and take of networking. Do you think it's important to change our terminology, equity seeking versus equity deserving versus equity denied group? You know, it's a really important question. And probably I should have used equity deserving. Thank you for that feedback. I don't know if you meant to give me that feedback, but if you did, I really appreciate it. And in the future, I'll talk about equity deserving. That's a much better term than equity seeking. Appreciate the comment. Next one, as a leader and an introvert, I'm more comfortable with networking one-on-one or in small groups and don't have a problem reaching out to new potential mentors in that way. However, I really dislike networking, schmoozing at big functions. Do you have advice for introverts or comment about the relative value of different types of networking? So I know this is from a female. Because they use their name. So I would say the comment that I just made a second ago is really important. I'm an introvert too, and I'm exactly like you in that I would prefer to work in small groups. But as a coach, for example, for 30 years, every weekend, I went out for dinner with 25 people because we always had a team dinner every weekend. Would it have been my choice to do that? Absolutely not. Would it have been something that I learned to do? You bet. And was it hard? It was really hard, but it set me up for future things that I didn't know were going to be valuable. So I would say your small networks are really, really important. And those, I'll give you another story that I didn't tell here, where when I centralized my team, my national team in Vancouver for a year one time before a World Cup, what I found out very quickly, it was an interesting lesson about networks. Obviously, the team and the support personnel in that team were automatically a support network for anybody that was there. But the people who actually lived in Vancouver had their personal networks close by. And so they were able to manage in a way that the kids that came from outside of Vancouver couldn't. So I recognized within 6 weeks, I had to send everybody home for 3 or 4 days so they could get loved up and come back and be ready to go with a fuller cup of energy. And so I think those close personal networks really serve a variety of purposes. What we're talking about is a leadership development network where you actually have to go outside of that close personal network. And so that means you have to be intentional, deliberate in choosing and selecting and picking people who you think would be valuable for you to know. And as I said, the only thing I can do is advise you to do is take a first step. Get allies who can help you, who you think would understand why you're doing it and would not question why you're doing it. So those people that are going to be supportive at the same time. So next question, considering the racial discrimination suffered most time, is there really a leadership growth for persons of color in Canada? And I would say, if there isn't, we are in trouble as a society in Canada. We want to maximize the potential of everybody that is in our country, and we can only do that by ensuring that people maximize their individual potential. And so leadership growth for everybody is important. Okay, another one. You spoke about negative interactions, microaggressions that leaders can receive from peers, and that this can be unexpected. What are some of the ways you've dealt with in your leadership career? You know, these are the things, there's lots of literature on this, actually, on microaggressions that leaders experience, whether it's, you know, I'll tell you, when I was an associate dean in phys ed at U of A, some of the emails that my colleagues wrote me were unbelievable. And I saved them all in a folder. And I saved them all in a folder. And I was going to read some of them in my final goodbye to the faculty. And I took the folder out and I read some of them again. And I thought, oh my God, how could people have done that? So I didn't want to do that because I thought it would be too embarrassing to read them. But when I got those emails, what I did was, instead of responding, I instantly shut my computer. Some days I waited for a day, but most of the time I walked directly to the office of the individual and said, okay, I just got your email. Let's have a chat. Clearly something's going on. I think what's really important is to call people on their behavior. There are some behaviors in the workplace that are just unacceptable. I had some staff that were allowed to behave in a particular way because previous leaders had not done that. And when I got in, I just said, it's not okay. It's not okay to do that. And my boss was one of the people that were in my position. And she said to me, you're so brave to take that person on, because I never could think of a way to do that, but this is exactly what we need to do. And I just think, unless we do that, people think it's okay to be disrespectful, to do the microaggressions that they're doing. So call them on their behavior. Will there be a certificate issued at the end of this training? Kathleen?
No, this is a professional development opportunity, and it's not a credentialed program, but we're glad that you could join us. But this will be recorded and people can access it for review.
Okay. I'm more comfortable with formal networking. So these are networks that are developed. When people approach me with special requests, I feel uncomfortable. I'd have to know a little bit more whether you're uncomfortable because you don't know the information, or you're afraid to give advice that might be bad advice, or I'm not clear why you would be uncomfortable. But for example, if people ask me for advice and I really am not good in that area, or I don't know, what I do is say, you know what, I'm not the person for you. I'm not the person to give advice on that topic, but here's a couple of people I know that might be helpful. If I do know the topic and it's uncomfortable because it might be on an issue that has some privacy concerns, I talk to the individual about that before I go further. And so I think it depends on why you're uncomfortable and what you might be doing. Now that I've been in the field for a while, many of those who have been in my network are now retired, in some cases for a considerable time period. This suggests to me that it's important to have network members across career stages. Also wondering about any advice when to stop relying upon those who've been away for some time. You know, this is a really interesting question for me because I'm currently on administrative leave and I've been out of my position as provost for 18 months. And what I would say is there's a currency for sure with an actual job that allows you to provide advice that's relevant, current, and meaningful. There are other pieces, though, that are, you know, I call them leadership truths that exist regardless of the current context. And so I think it's wise for you always to be updating your network, always to be looking for new people who could be in your network. But I don't think you should completely put the people who are out to pasture who have retired. I think those people actually have great advice, regardless of the currency of the information that they might be able to help you with. So just, I completely agree with you that it's important to network with a variety of people, and it's important to think about renewing your network consistently. Another one, whether networking or seeking advancement in leadership responsibility, I've found the underlying key ingredient is often the ability to magnetize others to your ideas and your vision. How do you advise one builds this capacity? I think that's important. If you are an idea generator and you've got some ideas that you think would be valuable for others to have, I think it's important to share those for sure. Sometimes those ideas might not fit with the values of the individual you're talking to, or they might not fit in the context in which they're working. And so I'd be careful in terms of when and how you share those ideas and who you share them with. I'm going to say, which might sound contradictory at the same time, never be afraid to share an idea on a topic that is different from what is being discussed. I always think good ideas can come from anywhere, and they can come from unexpected sources. So I would continue to share your ideas and continue to talk to people. And what I would do, I think it's important when you get feedback on your ideas to incorporate those feedbacks so ideas become different. I had the great pleasure of working with Carl Amrine as provost, and he was masterful at this. He and I would talk at 7 o'clock every morning. We'd have an idea that was on the table. We would sort of bat it around and it would get bigger as we were there. And by the end of the week, both of us would have talked to different people, but that idea was magnificent. And it was going to change how we did things fundamentally as either a collective leadership team at U of A or for the university more generally. So I think it's really important to share ideas. Okay, I think that's all, unless I think that's all. Thank you very much for the comments, the personal comments I haven't shared, but I really appreciate those. I hope that you have a great leadership journey, and thanks so much for coming to the session today. Kathleen, over to you.
Thank you very much, Drew. Thank you, Brendan. You'll see U of M Extended Ed for behind the scenes and making it work. It was a bit frantic 2 minutes before we started, so thank you all. And thank you for giving up your time today. I think it was a great session. Thank you very much, Drew. Just a quick note that we've just had a new micro certificate in university governance approved. And please watch, you'll be receiving some information about this very shortly. And we'd ask you to share it with those working in governance, governance professionals and secretariats, etc. So have a wonderful week, rest of the week all, and thanks so much.